Hello and welcome to a slightly different fantasy wildcard this week. As always, I'm your host, Matt. You can follow me on Twitter at MattFFDynasty. And now at this point, I'd usually introduce my two co-hosts, Kev and Ali. Sadly, neither of those guys are here, but fear not, we've brought in probably a better replacement. I think we've now made the actual two best people from the fantasy wildcard group. And we've brought on Mags to be my co-host today. You can follow him on Twitter at Hot Seat Mags. Mags, how you doing, mate?
Yes, Matt, absolutely great to be back again. We're saying just before that, I think I've been on the show more than Ali in the last month, so
Definitely.
it's nice to kind of out with the old and in with the new and get me in and let's get this show. Probably the best episode of the Fantasy Wildcard ever coming right up now, right?
100%, that's it. I've got an amazing new co-host today, and with that, we've also got an amazing guest joining us. He is a Dynasty content lead at King Fantasy Sports. Probably one of the nicest guys in the community. We had him on our streamathon, and he was absolutely brilliant to watch. And I think also he's still riding pretty high on his beloved Rams winning the Super Bowl last year. So we give a warm Fantasy Wildcard welcome to Lewis Wood, who you can follow on Twitter at LewisWoodFF_UK. Lewis, how are you doing?
Thank you so much, man. Yeah, really, really good to be here. I just want to add a little caveat. I'm not riding on the high of the Rams being in the Super Bowl last year. I am riding off the high of the Rams winning the Super Bowl last year, and that it's fascinating. I was on another podcast yesterday actually, and I was saying how it does remind me a little bit of like winning a fantasy championship. That you ride on an absolute high for the off season, you get close to the new season starting, and then you're like, oh, irrelevant, doesn't matter anymore. Everyone's gunning for the Kings, but the fact that we won the Super Bowl has basically been forgotten by this point. So I've had a lovely off season, still riding that high, but I don't know how long that's going to manage to continue as the regular season gets started.
No, I think you should definitely enjoy it, Lewis. I mean, obviously Mags as well, a Chiefs fan. I've got two guys here that support probably two of the better teams in the NFL. And I'm here, my little old New York Giants. Nowhere quite near the two teams that you two support. So hopefully at some point I can get that feeling that you two have had in recent years. But yeah, with that, we obviously have a great show coming up. We've got Lewis on, as I say, and on today's show, we're going to be discussing some players that are getting some of that training camp preseason hype this off season and how we're going to approach them from a dynasty perspective. So, Lewis, straight over to you with the first guy you want to talk about that's been building a little bit of hype this off season.
Absolutely. And just quickly before I do get started, I think it's really interesting to think about the way the fantasy community reacts to preseason hype. And I think we've seen a lot of in this offseason in particular, people do still react, but after the Jamar Chase controversy from last year, where we were told that he had forgotten how to catch, and then it turned out he did remember how, people are really kind of taking less stead into camp reports. I think it's been really interesting to see. But the first guy that I want to talk about as someone that is less so to do with preseason performance and more so to do with off-season changes, be that a new head coach, and also a really exciting offensive weapon, is Tua Tagovailoa. He's a really interesting one for fantasy this year because it feels like for both fantasy and for the regular NFL, this is someone who has to take the leap now. And if he's not going to be taking the leap this season, it feels like he's probably not going to at all. He's had, a really disappointing first couple of seasons, obviously been injured on and off, but still kind of not. He's had the occasional flash. You'll get real kind of Tua lifers, real believers in the talent, really highly rated coming out of college and until kind of the hip injury. But that season, it was, even with Joe Burrow ending up being the quarterback to pip him, it was all about tank for Tua beforehand, before we it was kind of overtaken, but really hasn't been that exciting. I was looking at kind of things like air yards per attempt or just looking at various different passing stats. I was looking at the top 25 for air yards per attempt in 2021. So obviously discounts the kind of the games that he might have missed. Do you guys want to guess where he might have finished in that top 25?
Mags?
Outside of it, I don't know.
Outside of it is correct. It is correct. Yes. He's not even on the screen. Quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater, Matt Ryan, Taylor Heineke, Carson Wentz are all on there, and he is not. He's a really interesting one because obviously bringing in Tyreek Hill and bringing in Mike McDaniel, as well as already having Jalen Waddle, we feel like he must be about to take this leap. For me, I'm a little bit less convinced. If you look at kind of quarterbacks who have managed to facilitate really outstanding talents beforehand, it's not necessarily kind of a dead cert that he's going to be elevated by just bringing in the new talents, and they can still have sustained output without Tua then finishing particularly high. I don't think we're going to see a huge amount of rushing for him. I think the run game is going to be really good in Miami if the offensive line can improve a little bit, obviously with bringing in some new talent as well. But I think the scheme is really friendly coming out of obviously San Francisco and the Shanahan tree. I think Tua will be fine. I think Waddle will be fine. I'm not convinced by Tua himself.
Yeah, just kind of doing some notes on this as well, Lewis, and we kind of touch upon a lot of the same things. Like, I think for a dynasty, like, you think, is Tua a buy? And you're like, but actually, most people that have to, as you said, probably will rate him quite highly. So you're probably not going to want to pay that price to take him off their hands. And yes, the weapons around him are really strong. And yeah, he's kind of an accurate quarterback when it's on those sort of like short, sharp little routes. He doesn't throw the ball deep, as you discussed. One thing about it is that Tyreek Hill is so explosive and so amazing that you actually don't necessarily have to be the most accurate deep thrower for Tyreek Hill. You just need to be able to hit these kind of open spaces, and Hill will, reach that ball 9 times out of 10. So that might help Tua. But for me, there are so many red flags with him as well. Like, you start back with the injuries all the way back to college. You mentioned that hip injury, and he gets hurt, nearly every year. And then we talk about, Mike McDaniel coming in, that run-heavy game. Is he going to be happy with Tua? I mean, he was part of that offense that wasn't happy with Jimmy Garoppolo, and he was part of that team that was in the discussions to bring in Trey Lance when he was still there. So are they going to do the same thing, and they're going to bring in someone who has a rushing upside at quarterback? I mean, there is an outside chance that Tua turns out to be like Kirk Cousins or even Jimmy Garoppolo even, but I don't see him being anything more than that.
Yeah, that's kind of the same. Oh, sorry, Matt. That's kind of a similar thing that I share. And I think that the interesting thing is we see these exciting new head coaches coming in with these younger quarterbacks. But the thing we have to remember is a regime that didn't draft a quarterback have no loyalty to them, which is why it's really a make or break year for Tua.
Yeah, completely agree, Lewis. That's exactly what I was going to say, to be honest. I'm personally I was really high on Tua when he came in as a rookie. I had him as QB1 in that class. So part of me deep down really wants him to succeed. And I feel like you mentioned, Lewis, this scheme that's coming, it's you'd imagine perfect for Tua, that as you say, 49ers style offense where it's more not reliant on the deep balls, it's more the short passes, the trickery plays, the keeping it short and simple for somebody like Tua. And we know that in terms of accuracy, he's right up there. And remember, we were speaking about Tua on a recent show when we were talking about Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and he is actually a really accurate quarterback. But like you say, we never really see those ARs, those deep passes from him. And I feel like now with this scheme, it's not really that reliant on those deep balls. And as Mags mentioned with Tyreek Hill, you've just got to get the ball in his hands, or even if you're not super accurate with his speed, it is going to get him. So I feel like this is the perfect situation, but at the same time, you absolutely nailed it, Lewis. This is the make or break year for him. He's now got all those weapons. You just look back to last year, he basically just had Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki coming in now again, but now they've surrounded him with some really interesting weapons. So yeah, I fully agree. This is a make or break year for Tua, and with that, it does become risky in terms of his dynasty value. But if it all hits well, if it all goes well, I think he's going to be a rock solid QB2, like Mag said. But I don't think he quite has that elite upside as some of the top guys at the end of that QB2 range, low QB1 range. But yeah, great guy to start on.
Yeah, one thing just to close off on Tua is I was having a look through, thinking about Tyreek's previous quarterbacks and putting Mahomes to one side. If you try and compare towards Alex Smith and looking at actually someone who's a more accurate player, doesn't quite have the rushing upside, doesn't quite have the arm, but can stand in the pocket and make throws and then let Yak carry them to a more successful performance. This is obviously kind of a one season sample size, and it probably doesn't mean too much, but it's worth saying that in Alex Smith's last season in Kansas City, when he obviously had Tyreek really early on in his career, he finishes as a QB3.
Yeah. Absolutely, and with that, that's why I'm interested for Baker Mayfield as well, and see what he can do over at Carolina. But yeah, that's a great start. And we talked a little bit there about Tyreek Hill. That kind of leads us on his former team, and the next player that you want to discuss, Lewis.
Yeah, Isaiah Pacheco is a really interesting player to me, and I think kind of sums up. There's more to him than in a dynasty argument than there is the player themselves. And it's the way that we look at running back opportunity. And it's the way that we sort of can jump on the hype of a player that we might not have watched or might not have scouted previously just because we think they might be coming into a role. Now, actually, Isaiah Pacheco, I think, looks like he's in a slightly different situation than when I put this forward, because it seems by all accounts that Ronald Jones is making the roster. It also seems like Jerick McKinnon is making the roster, and obviously Clyde Edwards-Helaire was never in doubt. That puts Pacheco in a weird spot because that's a lot of people he has to usurp. But actually, kind of going back and watching his tape, what you see is a really high-energy player and a player with a decent amount of speed. 4.37 in the 40 is not too bad. A decent amount of strength, decent size as well. I was left wanting for a lot of polish from him. I think you can see sort of that excited toddler running style where they're just running and running and running and they never want to stop. But there's that, not quite, the patience you need to see or the footwork you need to see. Obviously, these are things that can be added later on, but he's an interesting talent. I personally am not particularly on board with the people who are going out and buying him as if he is already the Chiefs RB1, because I just think, evidence has shown us that the later you're drafted, the less likely it is you're going to be fantasy relevant. And I know we all like to talk about, Adam Thielen as a undrafted free agent, or James Robinson a couple of years ago, and it can happen. It absolutely can. But there's a reason that we point out those examples, and it's because it doesn't happen very often. So I do think he's a player with a lot of talent. I think as a community, we're incredibly down on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and it comes from that kind of stinky effect of a player that you drafted high that let you down, and we've never really forgiven him for that, even though he's actually not been that bad. The last few years obviously has had a little bit of injury problem. The problem came that he was being so overdrafted, but actually finished as the PPR running back 22 in that first season, which, as a rookie, not that bad, solid RB2, that's fine. But he was being drafted like the RB6, so there was much higher expectations. But I think Pacheco, it's going to take a lot of work for him to beat out Clyde, but he's not even looking to beat him out yet. He's looking to take their down work or steal some early down work from Ronald Jones as well. So future is potentially bright. There is an opportunity there. I just think it's now looking to be harder work than we thought it was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no, fully agree. Like yourself, I think he's a really interesting player. Looking back to his college profile, he played over at Rutgers. Didn't really blow anyone away with what he did over there. Over 500 rushing yards, 500 rushing carries. 2,442 yards and 18 touchdowns. So as I say, nothing really that super wows. You did have a little bit of involvement in the receiving game as well, which I think can be interesting. Looking forward to his role maybe over at Kansas City. But like you said, I think when he ran that 4.37 at the combine, that's when really people started to take note of his name. Obviously, that tied first amongst the running backs there, so that caught people's eye, and that's when the hype kind of started to build. And then when the Chiefs took him, obviously he fell all the way to the 7th round. I think he became interesting again because he was on the Chiefs, but at the time, obviously, as you say, a round 7 pick. There's not many of those guys that tend to hit in fantasy, but in the training camp and in the preseason, he's definitely caught that little bit of hype again. And like you said, I think it's getting to that point where it is beginning to spiral out of control. Maybe now the fact that, like you said, they've kept those 4 running backs does make it a little bit more muddy. I think maybe if you mentioned Ronald Jones, if he did leave and they didn't keep him, that makes it a little bit more interesting with the 3 backs there. You feel like McKinnon's going to be that receiving back, that pass down back. So then it's between Pacheco and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And as you say, if we're talking about a first round running back against a 7th round running back, I know that, like you said, Edwards-Helaire hasn't lived up to the unreal expectation that I think people put on somebody like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But at the same time, I agree with what you said, Lewis. I think when he has played, he's looked a really solid running back. I think not quite the hype that we were all hoping for. But I do think he has been solid. But as you mentioned, those injuries, I think that's what makes Pacheco a really interesting guy. If those injury concerns do carry on, we know that Prado was there, not the biggest of running backs. I think that makes Pacheco interesting, and we've seen he's got that explosiveness, that one flash, that big playability that I think if they can get him out in space, then it becomes interesting. But as you said, I still feel like this is a crowded backfield, and I feel like the hype's building too much. RB 47 on keep trade cut, RB 54 on DLF's August ADP. So that is definitely starting to creep up in value. I'm like yourself, Lewis. I wouldn't be paying a fortune to go and get someone like Pacheco. If you were able to grab him cheap in your rookie draft, you're probably happy. I'd imagine you want to either try and sell him, or if you can't get that value that seems to be generating, then I feel like you should keep holding and see what happens. But yeah, Mags, have you got any final thoughts on Pacheco?
Yeah, I think Pacheco, I think I've said a few times, I don't know if I mentioned it last time I was on here, but like Ronald Jones was always going to make the team. Like, you don't bring in someone like Ronald Jones and you cut him. He was always going to make that team. Pacheco's real competition was Derek Gore. He's beaten out Derek Gore. He's got a spot on the team. There is a chance he can get some work if Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes down, or if, Ronald Jones does Ronald Jones stuff and fumbles the ball and gets in the bad books. He has a chance to get on the field. But I think if you're an owner of Pacheco at the minute, you're either looking to sell, or you just got to be willing to be patient with him and hope an opportunity comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next running back, Lewis, and we're talking about opportunity. I mean, this fits perfectly in someone that's got the complete reversal of that and a potential massive opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's Dameon Pierce for the Texans. This was a spot pre-draft that we looked at and went, because there was a real dearth of actual good opportunities for running backs. This is one that you looked at and went, yeah, they can be 3-down starter. It's a bad team, but they're a team that commits to the run, and I guess they can start. And then Breece Hall didn't go there, although there were rumors that they were really interested in him. Kenny Walker didn't go there. James Cook didn't go there. But actually, I was very happy because Dameon Pierce was my pre-draft RB4. He was someone that I was quite high on watching the tape. I think I'm very excited by players that play the way Dameon Pierce does, that he's very, very thickly built. He absolutely bounces players off of him. He looks like he's kind of got a real, a wound up motor to him that you just unleash him in every single play. He's running hard. You can see it all throughout kind of his tape in Florida as a 2-year starter there. And you can see that he's got a lot of strength in his legs. So he has the ability to break tackles. We've now seen in the last few hours, Marlon Mack get cut. So Dameon Pierce's only competition is Rex Burkhead, who I think is 57 years old and also not very good at football. So I think the Marlon Mack cut has basically confirmed to us that Dameon Pierce is the starter. And you might see Rex Burkhead get a little bit of work here and there in the same way that you see every running back, except Derrick Henry, get some work siphoned off them here and there. I'm really excited about Dameon Pierce. His ADP has already started to absolutely go through the ceiling in the same way it does with all of these each year. Do you remember Adrian Peterson got cut for the Commanders a couple of years ago and Antonio Gibson suddenly flew up drafts? Yeah. I've seen him in a recent draft, in a draft that I'm in at the moment. He went at the back of the 7th when his ADP was projected at about the 12th. But I think that's probably what you're going to see, because when you get past the running back dead zone, or even kind of during that, when you're looking at the Josh Jacobs, J.K. Dobbins kind of rounds, I can see why people want to go for the upside and the opportunity of a player that they might be a bit more excited about. It's someone whose tape I really, really loved. Again, in a similar way to Pacheco, if you're looking from a dynasty outset, if I drafted Dameon Pierce at the 206, which is about where he was going, I'm kind of happy to sell him right now. I think whenever you have a player who their value explodes in the off season, I'm kind of happy to capitalize on that and move on and just look at it at kind of a return on investment. But from a redraft perspective, I'm really interested in Dameon Pierce right away and think he's going to show that skill set very early on.
Yeah, I absolutely love this pick here. I mean, as I was typing up my notes, obviously, I just finished what I had to say about Marlon Mack. I said his best year was 2019. And then the Colts drafted Jonathan Taylor, so even at his best, he's not good enough for an NFL team. And then I was telling Matt, I think the Texans might have access to our Google documents for him because they cut him immediately after I typed that. And yeah, the rest of his competition is Rex Burkhead, who may as well be called T-Rex Burkhead because he's a fossil, right? He's so old. So it's definitely going to be the Pierce show over there at the Texans. And, he's like brilliant in preseason, which I know preseason is preseason, but looking really good is better than looking really bad. So he couldn't have made a better start so far. And, the main worry I would have about him is kind of the main reason I'm kind of excited about Davis Mills this year is the Texans are a pretty bad team. They're going to be throwing a lot. And Pierce, his value might depend a lot on touchdowns. But the problem is the Texans average less than 2 touchdowns per game last year, which is insanely low. That's not just like offensive touchdowns or rushing touchdowns. That's offense, defense, special teams, the whole lot. Less than 2 per game. So that would be my only worry about Pierce is we need the Texans to take a step forward for him to, really get that high-end value. But, I really like the pick. And, yeah, opportunity is value at the running back position. So I like that pick of Pierce, definitely.
Yeah, and let me just give you the experience of relying on these day 3 running backs as well, looking at the long term. My love for Michael Carter last year, and I mean, look how that ended up. You mentioned Brees Hall at the start, Lewis, and I would have loved him to have landed on the Texans for myself personally. But as you say, looking long term as well, we've just got to think about his 23 class. There's some really interesting running backs coming in. Obviously, Bijan Robinson's right at the very top of that. And if the Texans are needing a running back, I think they've probably got a few more issues as well. So maybe they don't target running back early, but you do just have to bear that in mind. Not a great deal of draft capital invested in Pierce. So as you say, he does really have to take the most of this opportunity, this massive opportunity that he's got this year. But if he does, then yeah, who knows? I think he can carry it moving forward, as I say, with a lot of needs for the Texans. But yeah, anything else, Lewis? Were you going to mention?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the difference you can see, I mean, Brees Hall, I think, is a bit more of a special player, although obviously the running back class coming in really, really is as well. But I was thinking about the Jags with finding James Robinson and then drafting Travis Etienne. James Robinson, the dream is to find a really low-cost running back who can run absolutely into the ground and spend your money elsewhere. We've seen about the value of the running back position. And the Jags then did the opposite. They found the gem and they went and drafted Travis Etienne instead. But the difference is that the Jags are a terribly run franchise. And whilst the Texans have had a lot of issues, looking at the work Nick Caserio has been doing as the GM there, looking at the draft this year, which I thought was spectacular, looking at kind of the transformation of the team, I wonder if they might be smart enough if Dameon Pierce hits to go, cool, we've done it, we found the running back. Now let's focus on, quarterback. If Davis Mills doesn't show out, still potentially looking for a right tackle, still looking for a corner to play opposite the high draft pick this year. Like, there's still more things they can do, and whether they might be smart enough to avoid falling into the trap.
Yeah, hopefully for you, Lewis, and your love for your running back, hopefully they do that. Sadly, it didn't quite work out for me, but I hope it does for you. But yeah, with that, we're going to move on to the final running back now that we're going to talk about, Lewis. And again, over to you.
Yeah, and this is all kind of, again, hype over the last few years combined with opportunity, and it's Chase Edmonds. He's someone that was really exciting in the entirety of his time in Arizona, whether it be playing slightly behind James Conner or whether it be when he was playing behind David Johnson. And now we've seen him. It's one of those running backs like Alexander Mattison, although actually he's potentially being traded soon, like Tony Pollard, that we were all screaming to go, he's so talented. I want to see him in a starting workload. And now it seems like we're going to. He's such a perfect fit for kind of the outside zone 49er scheme that's being taken over with Mike McDaniels. And they did bring in a fair amount of competition. Raheem Mostert is probably the most notable one, with Sony Michel being cut, which is a shame because he's a Super Bowl champion. Actually, I think now a 2-time Super Bowl champion, or potentially even more. But anyway, So, losing Sony Michel, I think, is then interesting. Raheem Mostert has had a history of injury worries. One of the interesting things with Chase Edmonds is his ADP is actually still pretty low. He's going lower than that range I was talking about previously. He's someone that I think the community is really in love with because we were in love with him previously, and now we think that he's going to have an opportunity to be the established starter in an exciting offense in a scheme which really suits his game. And we think he should be able to kind of explode with that workload.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much more to add to this list because I absolutely love Chase Edmonds. Anyone that listens to the show or follows me on Twitter knows I absolutely love Chase Edmonds. Like you said, you basically just read my notes there, Lewis, because I fully agree that the fit is perfect with that 49 style outside zone, like you mentioned. That fits perfectly to what Chase Edmonds does. Like you talked about, Michelle being cut, his only competition really is Raheem Mostert. While he again fits that, we've seen it before with that when he played for the 49ers, that speed that he has, it fits nicely. But like you touched upon, he's getting up there in age. I believe he's 30 now. Obviously coming off a real tough injury as well. It's just how long can he maintain that? I feel that, yeah, this is going to be the Chase Edmonds show. I'm really excited for it. We know he's got that receiving ability as well. Probably people think he's more of a receiving back than actually an out-and-out running back. So I think just as a whole in this offense, as we talked about with Tua there, with those short passes as well, just everything's, it's just like the perfect storm, I think, for Chase Edmonds. They paid him pretty nicely as well, $12 million. $1 2-year deal, which if you look at it, that makes him the 14th highest paid running back per year. So they've given him a pretty nice wage as well to go over to Miami. Yeah, I absolutely love Chase Edmonds. Currently RB32 on Keep Trade Cut, RB39 on DLF, and as you say, I still feel that's too low, to be honest. If Chase Edmonds hits, I can see him definitely gaining in value. And as I say, he's got a little bit of security having a 2-year contract. And yeah, super excited for Chase Edmonds. Mags, have you got any final thoughts on Chase Edmonds?
Yeah, no, you guys covered, the vast majority of that. He's got a great opportunity. I would actually just say for players out there, dynasty players out there, there's a chance that because Mostert knows the system so well that he might start off as the main running back. Use that chance to buy Chase Edmonds because Raheem Mostert will get injured. So whenever he does, then Chase Edmonds will be the main guy. So use that chance if there is one.
What would you pay for him if you're a contender in a dynasty league?
I think you could probably get a deal done where you are swapping out a player you don't like plus a second, and you should be able to get Chase Edmonds, a player that, obviously still holds a bit of value, but you maybe aren't the highest on him, and you might be able to flip it and get a Chase Edmonds. You could also, if you really, really like him, you could, give up a first, but get Chase Edmonds and maybe like a pick back as well, something like that. I wouldn't be giving a first straight up. I think that's too much, but you might be able to give a first and get a little bit back on the other side.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a prime candidate for the tear down sort of trade. So if you're playing with, if you still have like a Zeke on your roster, you still have a James Conner on your roster as kind of an RB2 or 3, aiming to tear down from one of them to Chase Edmonds plus, an early 2, somewhere around that, I think is a deal that you can look to do and still be able to contend this year.
Lewis, I think we're in perfect sync here because that was exactly what I was going to say, is that ideal pivot down. As you mentioned, that RB dead zone guys like Josh Jacobs and as you mentioned, if you can pivot down to somebody like Chase Edmonds, just looking at Keep Trade Cut, there's all those guys tend to be above him. So yeah, I think he's the ideal pivot down because I think personally he's going to outplay all of those guys, and I think he can be a solid RB2 in fantasy next year. So yeah, I think that's a perfect example of a way you could go and acquire him. So with that, we're now going to move on to some wide receivers. Who's the first wide receiver we're going to talk about, Lewis?
Well, the wide receiver we're going to be talking about today is someone who, again, it could be about opportunity. Someone I liked a lot coming out of college, and it's Romeo Doubs for the Green Bay Packers. What I did want to highlight before I go on to anything else is in the live stream, I was on the Packers episode and I talked through a love for Romeo Doubs. And that was obviously a fair few months ago. You guys are nodding because I've told you, Ali's told you, Kev's told you. I talked through when I was asked kind of about who the Packers wide receiver one could be or who I was interested in drafting. I said Doubs because I thought he profiled really well as kind of a project alpha wide receiver in a way that I think Christian Watson probably doesn't, because I think Christian Watson he has decent size and speed, but I'm not sure he's ever going to be, that kind of contested catch outside threat, throw it up to him and he can outmuscle the DB. And in a way that when you look at the rest of their receiving core, it's something they don't really have. We've seen that he's going for lunch with Aaron Rodgers. And, given how important it was, Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford going for breakfast together, and the end result of that, it's something that's massively overhyped. But, it does show kind of the intangibles, the other side of things. You don't know how important that's going to be. Aaron Rodgers typically isn't someone that gels with rookies early on. But actually, at Nevada, he really, really thrived as kind of the number one target for Carson Strong, and he was someone that I was really interested in. As kind of, he was in the way I did my wide receiver tiers this year is I had a tier 1 just off the bat, and then tier 2 I had Project Alpha, and I had Project / Gadget. So he was second in the tier 2 of the Project Alphas behind George Pickens. And then on the other side, you had kind of like Sky Moore, Wendell Robinson kind of players. But I thought he was someone that I could easily see a path to relevance for, and he's ended up in a situation where it looks like he could be relevant quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like he's coming off that, those back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons over at Nevada with, a really excellent, as you kind of touched, a really excellent dominator rating as well, coming out of there, that real chance to be that alpha. And, he does have limited competition in terms of the talent that's around him, but unfortunately not with like just the sheer amount of receivers that are still there. Like, and then the only thing you got to worry about is, Rodgers, only a few years left in the league. You'd imagine, is he going to be willing to start building that rapport with a new rookie, or is he going to continue to throw to like Lazard and Tunyon and Aaron Jones and all the guys that he knows, like Randall Cobb is still there, right? So is he going to use those guys, or is he going to take a risk and build up that rapport? But good signs like going for lunch, like he's not going to do that, because he really trusts Romeo Dobbs's like restaurant taste. Like he's doing that for a reason, right? I don't think Dobbs is like a sous chef on the side, so he'll be going for that to try and build up a rapport. And the one thing that really does worry me, though, about Dobbs isn't anything to do with his talent. I think he is a tremendous talent. It's this list right here. D'Angelo Yancey, Equiminius St. Brown, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Jamon Moore, and Amari Rodgers. Those are the last five wide receivers. Yeah.
I thought that was going to be your dream dinner party guest.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's definitely not Aaron Rodgers' dream dinner party guest. Those are the last 5 receivers that the Packers drafted before they took Christian Watson, and it's not pretty reading. So Dobbs would have to break that mold. He is, very talented, but I just feel that there is also still a chance that at the end of this season, you got your dynasty and fantasy players going, Romeo, where art thou, Romeo?
Oh, what a lovely way. I think we've got to end it on that lovely little bit of poetry there from Max. Absolutely love it. So with that, we're going to move on to the next wide receiver, Lewis, that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one because some of these are players that I'm pointing out because they're people that I'm quite in on, looking at Damian Pierce, and some of them are players that I actually kind of want to talk about the reasons I'm not particularly in on them when the fantasy community really is. This guy was the ultimate hype guy over the offseason, particularly due to a really strong playoff performance, and that's Gabe Davis. Now, Gabe Davis had a 4-touchdown, 200-yard performance against the Chiefs in the playoffs in potentially the best football match of all time. I think it was unbelievable.
Not for me at the time. That was
the best football match of all time that also caused Mags to have a strike. But aside from that,
as a neutral, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it was brilliant. And Gabe Davis looks absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
He's in a really high-powered offense. He's shown flashes where he can succeed, and then he has absolutely rocketed up boards afterwards. He's a third-year player. He obviously been in the year 2 league so far. He has finished as the PPR wide receiver 57 both years. So it's not something you're particularly excited by. Actually having the same amount of receptions both years with 35. So yes, he had the monstrous playoff performance, but if we look through his performance last year, in the season, he really struggled. And yes, you can say that, they've lost a fair amount of target competition for him, with Cole Beasley leaving, with Manny Sanders leaving. But those two players' combined age last year was 75. 65.
That's almost
It could have easily been
difference.
70.
Yeah, like, you've got two players that, whilst still perfectly talented, if you're an exciting young player, you should be looking to beat out. So I'm not sure I'm particularly in on the fact that he only really started to thrive once those players were sort of out of the window. Emmanuel Sanders had an injury late on, and Cole Beasley with COVID woes or anti-COVID woes. This year they've brought in Jameson Crowder. Isaiah McKenzie seems to be thriving throughout camp as the presumed starting slot. It's looking like Gabe Davis is going to be, well, it's not even looking like, he's going to be the starting wide receiver 2 for Josh Allen. And that comes with a lot of perks, with, a probably unquestionably top 3 quarterback in the league. For me, I'm not quite willing to pay the price for the breakout yet, having only really seen it in that one game, and not really being in season as well. Anything can happen in the playoffs. And I don't particularly like drafting off the back of an exciting performance in one game, which seems to be what's happening at the moment. His ADP is absolutely flown through the roof, to the extent that you're seeing him around, the similar range of players I'm a lot more interested in, to be frank with you. In that sort of wide receiver 25 to 30 range, that I think there's a lot of more secure talent. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if he, came out and dominated, just because of who his quarterback is and the offense that he's in. And clearly there is talent there. You don't, score 4 touchdowns and get 200 receiving yards without being a talented wide receiver. For me, I'm not quite there yet with him.
Yeah, I think I'm fully with you, Lewis. Like you mentioned, he is that hype player. I think that the most hyped out of all the players we spoke about. He's that one that's really stood out all off season, and he's that Marmite player. And you're either on the side of liking him or on the side of where you're not quite there with him. I'm with you, Lewis. I'm not quite there with Gabe Davis. Like you said, he is going to be it looks to be the wide receiver 2 over in Buffalo, and we know the quarterback. We know how great that offense is as a whole. Like you said, showed it in that one playoff game, but beyond that, we've seen very little from him in terms of the regular season. Does throw out those splash plays, touchdowns, well, he's had 13 touchdowns in his last 2 years. If you just want to compare that to DJ Moore, he's just got one less than what DJ Moore's got in 4 years. And it's basically the opposite of DJ Moore, isn't it? DJ Moore produces with the yards, whereas Gabe Davis is that splash touchdown player. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think this is the year where, again, he really has to prove it this year, because, as I say, it was a day 3 pick when the Bills picked him up. There's not a great deal of depth behind, obviously, Stephon Diggs, the lead wide receiver there. So you feel like with the 2023 class that's coming up, there's definitely some top-end wide receivers there that I think teams are going to be interested in. And Buffalo having one of the you presume, later picks in the first round, that's where you tend to see these wide receivers come off the board. So, yeah, I think he's got to have a really big year to hold down that wide receiver 2 position. And then, as you mentioned, just looking at the ADP, it's definitely shot up. His wide receiver 32 now on Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 37 on DLF, and just looking at Keep Trade Cut, the guys below him, Treylon Burks, Brandon Ayuk, Keenan Allen. I'd take all 3 of those guys over
Keenan Allen.
Keenan
Allen. If
exactly.
You own Gabe Davis and you are not trading him for Keenan Allen, I don't understand how you're playing fantasy football. Keenan Allen, man.
Could not agree. But
Keenan Allen is my redraft wide receiver 6.
I love that I got that reaction out of you, Lewis. That's exactly what I want. That just emphasised my point even more. I absolutely love it. Yeah, but I'm with you. I'm looking to move off him wherever possible. Mags, are you in the same boat?
Sell.
Yeah. That's all we need on it. And with that, we're going to move on to the final wide receiver we're going to talk about, Lewis.
It's Keenan Allen. No, it's not. This is interesting, actually, because I was on the UK Steelers podcast yesterday, and we spoke quite a lot about this guy, George Pickens. So he is one of the most, if not the most talented rookie wide receiver. And I think that's probably something a lot of people wouldn't have any qualms with. He's had a bit of an injury history. He's also had a fair amount of off-season trouble throughout his college career. But a tremendously talented wide receiver. I think those two things combined is what pushed him down to the mid-second. I think otherwise, I don't see any talent reasons why he shouldn't have been up there with Drake London. Now, thankfully for George Pickens, he has found himself with probably the head coach who deals with talented players with troubled off-season issues better than anyone else with Mike Tomlin. You know, we only really found out how much of a diva Antonio Brown was after he left Pittsburgh. We only really found out what the troubles were with Lev Bell after he left. We knew some of the issues with Big Ben, but the fact that he managed to have them on the roster for so long and be so successful, he's clearly so good at managing this. Now, George Pickens is an interesting one for me. I think I'm quite happy with him in a dynasty league, and I think down the line he's going to be really successful. It looks like he's starting at outside receiver and has been quite hyped up in camp with Chase Claypool starting in the slot. The issue for me in redraft, and the issue for me just looking at the season upcoming, is you're going to be starting with Mitch Trubisky, who is bad, and then you're going to be moving on to Kenny Pickett, who is a rookie. And whilst there seems to have been some flashes, he was actually quite close to being my preseason hype quarterback. But I just didn't want to talk about Kenny Pickett for 5 minutes.
I just want to say thank you, Lewis, for making that decision, because I didn't either.
Yeah, whilst there have been some flashes, you know, you're still going to have a really uncertain season, whether it's Trubisky or whether it's Pickett. There are 5 potential fantasy relevant skill position players in Pittsburgh: Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens, Najee Harris, and Pat Freiermuth. There is a 0% chance that all 5 of them can be relevant with these players at quarterback and with the offensive line woes that they're having, and kind of with a not particularly good offense. If you're asking me, which you kind of are because you've invited me on, Deontay Johnson, I think, is a sure thing. Najee Harris is a sure thing. And then I think you can get one more from the other 3 because Deontay's starting as an outside receiver, and obviously very versatile and successful outside receiver. Najee in the backfield. I think you're more likely to have the other successful player be someone playing kind of being targeted in those kind of short to mid routes and kind of over the middle, and that's looking at either a slot receiver or a tight end. So if you're asking me, I'd say the 3rd fantasy relevant player will probably be Pat Freiermuth or Chase Claypool in the slot. It's not to say that I don't think George Pickens is fantastic, because I think he's really, really talented. I just don't think this is going to be the year for him.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, like to said a lot of things. I was going to say he was like a lot of people's number 1 wide receiver before that injury, and what I thought was really interesting, he is currently the bookies' 3rd favorite to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year, just behind Pickett and Hall, which I thought was a really interesting one. His odds are like 10-1, whereas like Hall is maybe 7-1, Pickett is 6-1. So it's not like he's a massive outsider at 3rd. He's a 3rd favorite, and you can kind of see why, because the Steelers, you know, obviously have this reputation for building these wide receivers, and they do well at building even wide receivers straight out as rookies. And I actually think he could be quite interesting in the red zone as well. I mean, Deontay Johnson, you know, he's an okay red zone threat. He's not a brilliant red zone threat. He's not really, you know, blowing anyone away with how he's doing there. So he could be interesting in the red zone. Claypool, you mentioned him. He's a bit of a knucklehead, right? He's just like, I know Tomlin does forgive these things, but like the celebration whenever like they were trying to win the game, and the thing about, oh, maybe we should play music in training, and Tomlin's like, maybe you should just actually train.
And coming out, there was an interview with in this offseason where he was like, I know for sure that I'm a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL.
Bro, really? Like, you're not even a top 3 receiver on your own team, mate. Like, let's calm it down, right? So yeah, I do think he has potential to sneak in and have like a good first year, but I'm kind of with you. I don't think he's going to blow anyone away in the first year. I think going forward, though, you know, the Steelers did just pay Deontay Johnson. They're not in the habit of doing that. They haven't paid anyone since Antonio Brown. Now they have paid Johnson. I don't see them doing the same with Claypool and with others. So he could find that role growing as he went into the 2nd year. I'm really worried this year about that offensive line. They spend at the minute $32 million on it when the top line is high 40s, even early 50s, for millions of dollars on what you're wanting to spend on the top offensive line. So they're miles behind that. They didn't really invest in it too much as well in the draft or in free agency. So it all boils down to, do you trust Tomlin do you trust the Steelers? And I do. I think he will end up, being a fantasy relevant player. Just it might take a little bit of time. And did you see the guy pushed over, by the way? Can we talk about that? That was awesome. That was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Pickens as well. I think he's one of my most owned players in Dynasty this offseason in my rookie drafts. I'm not afraid to admit that I've been getting him at the end of the first round in my rookie drafts. I don't mind getting him a little bit early. I know his ADP was more around that early second. I was more than fine paying the 109, 110 to grab him because I'm with you, Lewis. I'm a massive believer in the talent. I think it was that injury that derailed that value a little bit. So yeah, fully on board, and I absolutely love Pickens. Long term. So with that, we're going to move on to the final player we're going to talk about. Quick one about the tight end, and who we're talking about, Lewis.
We're going to be talking about Isaiah Likely, and this you'll notice that's the only one I've not done kind of a big lead into because I think he was the only real candidate to talk about here. And it's interesting looking at, we're obviously saying with this is a tight end, and obviously he is, but the way he's projecting to be played in the Ravens offense, in the Ravens system, they are probably going to lead the league in 2 tight end sets. So we instantly look and we go, but they've got an elite starter. So where's he really going to be playing? But actually, his competition for snaps is not Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely's competition for snaps is Devin Duvernay. It's James Prochet. It's whoever else is on the Ravens wide receiver core, which, it's not particularly exciting outside of Rashad Bateman. But if we look at them trading away Hollywood Brown, they want this. This isn't a case of, we've built a really terrible wide receiver core. This is a case of, no, this is how we want to build. We want one do-it-all guy on the outside, and everything else we're going to build around our tight ends and our running game. He has absolutely dominated the preseason. I think in the last game of the preseason, he caught every single target that he saw for 100 yards and a touchdown or something like that. He's really thrived. I actually thought, because they grabbed a pair of tight ends, and I actually thought Charlie Kohler was the more relevant player and the player that I maybe saw a little bit more of coming out. But actually, it's obviously been Likely that's dominated, and Charlie Kohler's injured. So I think, weirdly, you have a path to early fantasy relevancy. Obviously, there's not a huge upside because at most he's ever going to be the third receiving target on the team for a team that doesn't really pass that much. But, if you were taking him in rookie drafts, you probably got him in the 5th if you didn't get him off waivers. And if you find yourself with a PPR option at tight end towards the end of this year, towards the end of next year, that's a really, really good return on your investment.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I absolutely loved Isaiah Likely. Pre-draft, he was my tight end 3, so a guy that I had definitely had my eye on leading into the NFL draft, playing over at Coastal Carolina. Did a thread on him on Twitter, and that's really what caught my eye when I was looking into him and what he did over there. So really excited about what his play style was. Not too happy, like you mentioned, when he landed with the Ravens. Obviously, we know Mark Andrews' league guy there, and then he wasn't even the first tight end that they selected in the NFL draft, so that did dampen my spirits a little bit. But as you say, this offseason, his hype's been building. That 8 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown against Arizona was amazing. And then his good friend Dynasty Island actually pointed out a really interesting stat that in the preseason he ran 29 routes. 21 of those he ran them from the slot, so that just shows you how they're looking to use him, not even just as a inline tight end. They want to get him the ball, and that's what I saw from him in college is a real playmaking tight end, not your prototypical normal blocking tight end. Is more that receiving tight end. So for fantasy, I was absolutely excited by him. Had it dampened a little bit, but yeah, this preseason it's got those hopes back up for me, and long term, I'm super excited to see how it plays out for him. And even like you mentioned, Lewis, even short term, the fact that there's very little competition for targets. And as I say, the way that you're using him, seeing him used in the slot quite a lot as well this preseason, it's starting to get me back on board with him a little bit. His ADP is creeping up though, tight end 19 now on Keep Trade Cut, tight end 23 on DLF. So he's creeping up to that range of guys like Brevin Jordan, a player from last year that show flashes. So yeah, I definitely think he's a really exciting tight end to look forward to, hopefully in the future. But yeah, with that wraps that up, and we're now going to move on to the wildcard section. So we've got our brilliant guest Lewis to give us his wildcard selection, so the player that he thinks is going to improve the dynasty value the most in 2022. So Lewis, without further ado, who is your fantasy wildcard?
Well, this is someone that I think no one is really surprised that I'm going to have chosen. It's someone that's a little bit of a fantasy darling at the moment. Wasn't particularly highly rated coming into the NFL, but actually now is up to the quarterback 8 on Keep Trade Cut. Is someone that has had a massive turnaround this offseason and has the opportunity and the potential to develop into a real NFL star and a fantasy darling as well. And that's Jalen Hurts. Hurts was someone I really liked before he came into the NFL. And then when he went to Philadelphia, it's an interesting one where you look at it and you go, that tells me something. And the fact he managed to take over from Carson Wentz within his first season didn't really surprise me. The crucial thing when looking at Hurts is looking at obviously his previous play in the NFL, but also looking at his surrounding cast now. So he has 3 top-end receiving threats. One of the best young talents in the NFL, in AJ Brown, obviously coming over from the Titans this year, and having a skill set that really helps a young developing wide receiver, because AJ Brown tends to work a lot in kind of the short game with, you know, yards after catch, but also is the kind of guy that he's so strong, he's so physical, you can chuck it up and sort of wait for him to win it in the air. Devonta Smith, who I thought was really, really good last year, and, you know, kind of got a little bit outshone because of how good Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle were, but Devonta Smith himself was really good last year. And then Dallas Goedert, who's a really prolific red zone threat, you know, took over from Zach Ertz as tight end 1, and I think they're really happy with him. You know, I'm less interested in for fantasy, but very talented player. Then also potentially the best offensive line in football, especially with the injuries that we've seen in Dallas and the injuries we've seen in Tampa. I think the Eagles are certainly up there, and they also, because they're a very well-run franchise, they're always kind of bringing in depth and building for the future. So they've brought in, is it Gadecki? I can't remember who the center prospect is that they brought in as like the next guy up after, it's probably Jason Kelsey's last year was extended for a 1-year deal this offseason. So it looks like they're going to continue with the offensive line domination. It has done for the last few years. So I think you're then looking at a player who, we're at the point at which Jalen Hurts either breaks out and is the Eagles starter for the next, 5-6 years and gets a big contract, or they draft someone new next year. They've positioned themselves really, really well with 2 first-round picks next year in an exciting quarterback class. If Jalen Hurts doesn't ball out, they can go and get a Bryce Young. They can go and replace him, and they can move on. But actually, looking at the way Jalen Hurts played last year, he was 19th in EPA per play, which is, pretty middle of the road. But for a second-year starter, and actually, didn't start until the end of his first season anyway, to be kind of middle of the road, I think we should be pretty happy with that. Not everyone is Justin Herbert and breaks out immediately. It does take quarterbacks generally a bit longer to develop. In terms of fantasy, he has one of the highest floors of any fantasy quarterback, just because of that rushing ability combined with the offensive line. And if he's developing even slightly as a passer, we're going to see him potentially, cementing himself as an elite starter for years to come. Jalen Hurts, one of the last things to touch upon for me, one thing that I like to do before any season starts, and I'm probably going to release this in the next week, is to look at all of the players that I think have the upside to finish as the number 1 overall player in their position. And Jalen Hurts is one of maybe 4, maybe 5 quarterbacks that can do that, with the combination of, a really fantastic offensive line, some really good weapons around him, and the rushing upside as well compared to the fact that I don't think the running backs are that good. So I think if you're going to put together a running game, which they started to do towards the end of last season, you're going to build it around your quarterback. I think he has all of the hallmarks of a player that could could absolutely explode. I'm not putting all of my eggs into the Jalen Hurts basket, which I think is what the Eagles are doing as well by kind of moving one of those first round picks to next year just in case. But he's a player that I can really look at and go, I think he's going to be amazing this season for fantasy, and I can see the path to him being the like absolute consensus QB4 in startups next season.
Yeah, I'm not going to say too much about Jalen Hurts. He was my, unplanted flag only a few weeks ago on this show. So, I called him Zoolander because he can't throw left. So I can't say too much about him. Look, I don't see him rising too much. I can even see guys like Deshaun Watson, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence actually going above him potentially in dynasty rankings. But you know what? If he can sort his arm out, he does have a chance. But he's got to win games for the Eagles, or they will replace him in that 23 draft, as you said. But he's got a chance, and I'm happy to be wrong if he does end up balling out, and I wish him all the best.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a little bit like what we spoke about with Tua. It feels like that make or break year, but on the flip side of that, they've surrounded him with those weapons. And as I said, with Tua, he doesn't have that ceiling. You can't really say that for Jalen Hurts because we've seen that rushing ability, and now that the fact they've added AJ Brown, who's one of the definite better wide receivers in the NFL, top 10, I think, without question. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out for Jalen Hurts, and if it all does fall into place and he does get that long-term contract. Fully agree, Lewis. He's going to be a top 4 consensus quarterback, I think, in Dynasty, but obviously is that risk.
If you knew that Jalen Hurts was going to be the Eagles starter for 5 years, where would you take him in a startup?
Like you said, QB4, I think he's got to be right up there with that upside that he has.
Max?
He'd break my top 32 then, yeah.
he might plant the flag back if he does that. But no, with that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you once again, Lewis, for coming on. It's been great. We've discussed some of the camp and preseason hype players. But before you do go, please do let everyone know where they can find you and anything that you want to plug before you leave.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter at LewisWoodFF_UK. All of my writing takes place on King Fantasy Sports, which you can find a link to on my profile. We've got a lot of stuff coming up. So Kingy, who runs it, has been doing a preview for every single team, which is obviously a nice way. If you've got your draft coming up this weekend, right before to go, crap, I haven't looked at anything that's been going on, what's changed. It's a nice little way to look at it. There's also, I'd say, to watch this space for a King podcast itself on the way in potentially, hopefully, the next few weeks. I love coming on with you guys, and I love podcasting, so it'd be nice to get into doing it a lot more as well. But yeah, I know some good stuff coming up in season as well.
Love it. And Mags, any final thoughts from you?
No, just thanks for having me on to co-host with you, Matt. Absolutely loved it. Always love coming on to the show. Love chatting with Lewis again as well. And yeah, guys, make sure you're keeping your eyes peeled for the brand new Wildcard Rewind show coming to a screen near you very soon. So keep your eyes peeled. Make sure you're following it at Wildcard Rewind. Myself, Han Rowland, the absolute legend, and Paul Pickin, who's all right.
No, so I get to thank both of you guys, Mags, obviously, for co-hosting with me, and as you say, looking forward to Dynasty Rewind starting. That's going to be a lot of fun. And Lewis, thank you for coming on and being a great guest. And yeah, if you are doing that podcast, I can't wait to see that happening. And it's been great to finally be able to talk to you, obviously, when you came on the stream. Sadly, I wasn't able, but I did watch while having my breakfast, so I knew that Romeo Dubs we're gonna get a little bit of talk there. But yeah, thank you for coming on, Lewis. It's been an absolute blast, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Wildcard. Also, if you could leave us a 5-star podcast review, that'd really be appreciated. It helps get exposure to a wider audience. And be sure to join us on our next show, Tuesday the 6th of September. It's gonna be our final show before the new season starts. And we're bringing on our good friend Dynasty Island, Rich Coolin. Obviously, we had Liam on the other week, so we get the worst half. I'm going to say. I think I'm on the side of Liam. We're gonna really dig into Rich, and it's gonna be a lot of fun getting Rich on. So yeah, do keep your eyes peeled for that when it drops, as I say, on Tuesday, 6th September. So thanks once again. Have a good one, and we'll see you